Rebels, and welcome to episode 12 of the Rebel and Reawaken podcast. It's time to rebel against merely surviving by reawakening your passions and zeal for life to truly begin thriving. This podcast was created to give you practical and usable tips and tools to help you cultivate a life in recovery that you love and can't wait to live out each day. Together, we are saying goodbye to running to things that drain us and leave us feeling depleted so that we can step into the life that we were made for. While this podcast is geared towards those in recovery from drugs and alcohol, anyone can benefit from the tools we discuss here because if we're honest, we are all recovering from something. At some point in time, we are all in the process of recovering life in one way or another. So you are welcome here, and together we will recover life and create a life we love to live. This week, we are going to talk about why teens drink and use drugs to cope and how to recognize when it's a problem. Why do teens use? Who are the most susceptible kiddos? What to look out for? And how do you help a teen that is suffering? Those are the questions we're going to answer today. I am overly passionate about this specific topic because at the age of 15, I was introduced to alcohol. At 16, I was introduced to marijuana. And at 17, I was introduced to ecstasy, meth, mushrooms, and GHB for the first time. All the party drugs. My life was consumed with drugs and alcohol, partying, and twisting off from the age of 17 until the age of 20. I have seen many of my friends from that high school group of friends struggle with substance abuse that began when we were in high school and has continued well into their late 30s. I know firsthand the detrimental effects substance use can have on the teenage brain and how those effects can be permanent. My best friend from back in the day started doing drugs at the same time I did. I got sober in 2005 at the age of 20. He did not. He continued to self-medicate and use illicit drugs, and now he has chemically induced schizophrenia and will never be able to live independently. I am heartbroken every time I think about how his life is shattered because of choices that we made when we were teenagers. So I decided to make this podcast episode this week because I've been heartbroken over and over again as I'm reading the news and seeing all of these horrible stories of children dying from fentanyl poisoning and kids getting into trouble with guns and the violence that's happening between kids. And it can usually be stemmed back to drugs and alcohol. So I felt really, really called to put out this episode today. As teens, we cannot see the long-term effects of our choices. We cannot even begin to fathom the possibility that our choices to try a drug at a party could lead to a lifelong battle with substance use disorders. As parents, we convince ourselves that our teens' drug use is just an experimental phase or it will pass, or we flat out ignore it. We sweep it under the rug and act like it isn't happening. We refuse to see the warning signs. We write it off as typical teenage behavior, and in some cases, parents encourage it or say it's okay. Regardless of why our teens' drug use is overlooked or unidentified, today, I hope to shed some light on teen drug abuse and hopefully help at least one teen get the help that they need. Part 1 of today's episode is the who of teenage drug abuse. Who is the most susceptible and why? So according to a study that was published by Whitesell, Backend, Peel, and Brown, that is a mouthful, children who experience maltreatment such as abuse or neglect, parental or familial substance abuse, multiple life stressors, poor parent-child relationships, or positive parental view of substance abuse can be powerful predictors of adolescent substance abuse. So I want to look at each one of these and break down what it actually looks like in real life. These same researchers found that there are high levels of illicit drug use associated with sexual abuse, and that's higher than with any other form of abuse. During my master's program, I focused my thesis research on the prevalence of substance use disorders among familial sexual abuse survivors. My research indicated that individuals who do not disclose their abuse are more likely to use illicit drugs. They're more likely to develop substance use disorders and engage in promiscuous sexual behavior in their teenage years. I found that survivors who disclosed their abuse and were met with acceptance, belief, therapeutic resources, and reassurance of their innocence in the abuse were less likely to turn to drugs and alcohol as coping mechanisms later in life. Conversely, those who disclosed their abuse but were met with unbelief, no therapeutic support, or whose abuse was swept under the rug were as likely as those who did not disclose to struggle with drugs, alcohol, and promiscuous sexual behaviors. So I want to shed some light on the warning signs to look out for in your children when it comes to sexual abuse. Since it is the most predominant precursor for adolescent substance abuse, I want to make sure that we highlight it here so that you know what to keep an eye out for. And hopefully, if your child is dealing with this, identify it and start to get them some treatment so that they don't have to turn to self-medicating with drugs and alcohol as a way of coping. So physical warning signs of sexual abuse are STIs, or sexually transmitted infections, signs of trauma to the genital area, such as unexplained bleeding, bruising, or blood on the sheets, underwear, or other clothing. Behavioral signs include excessive talk or knowledge of sexual topics, keeping secrets or not talking as much as usual, not wanting to be left alone with certain people, or being afraid to be away from primary caregivers, especially if that is a new behavior. Regressive behavior or resuming behaviors that they had grown out of, like thumb sucking or bedwetting. Overly compliant behavior. Sexual behavior that is inappropriate for the child's age. Spending an unusual amount of time alone. Trying to avoid removing clothing to change or bathe. Some emotional signs to look for is a change in eating habits, a change in mood or personality, such as increased aggression, decrease in confidence or self-image, excess worry or fearfulness, increase in unexplained health problems, such as stomach aches or headaches, loss or decrease in interest in school activities and friends, nightmares or fear of being alone at night, and self-harming behaviors. I cannot emphasize enough, if you suspect that your child has suffered or is suffering sexual abuse, the most important thing you can do is support them with positivity, remove them from the situation, provide them therapeutic resources, such as therapy or support groups, and show them acceptance. Helping them process and heal from the abuse is paramount to their future mental and physical health. The same study I previously mentioned, the researchers found that witnessing violence can increase substance use disorders involving alcohol, cigarettes, marijuana, and other hard drugs. This is because witnessing violence leads to higher levels of stress and can lead to using drugs and alcohol as a coping mechanism. You can help your child process the stress and fear from witnessing a violent act by helping them get into therapy or talking it out with them to help them process the event. Next, let's talk about parental or familial substance abuse. This may seem like a no-brainer, but I think it's important to talk about. Kiddos who are raised in homes where drugs and alcohol are used and celebrated or thought of as normal are more likely to start using drugs and alcohol at an earlier age. So according to a study by Bava and Tabert, those with early substance use onset are more likely to continue into adulthood. Individuals who first use alcohol at age 14 or younger have a 5 times increased risk of lifetime alcohol use disorders as compared to those whose first use of alcohol was after the legal limit age of 21. Furthermore, adolescent alcohol and marijuana use has been linked to harmful effects on physiological, social, and psychological functioning. This includes increased delinquency, aggressivity, risky sexual behaviors, hazardous driving, or comorbid substance use disorders. So what that means is that they're using more than one substance at the same time. So they might be smoking weed and taking Xanax, or taking Adderall and smoking weed. That's what comorbid means. So for me, I grew up in a family where drinking was at the center of all things, all celebrations, grief, anger, you name the emotion, it was an excuse to drink. I know I've said that a million times, but just in case this is your first episode to listen to, I grew up in a family where drinking was very normal. Then I was introduced to some of my friends' families where smoking weed and doing drugs was no big deal. Smoking weed was basically the same as smoking a cigarette for them. Doing meth was a family activity. I had multiple friends whose families functioned this way. So when I say that I can personally attest to the fact that in my brain, smoking, drinking, and getting high, it seemed perfectly normal and okay. So when I was offered drugs or booze, I didn't think much of it. I didn't think to say no. I thought it was just part of coming of age. Offspring of alcoholics are 3 to 5 times more likely to develop an alcohol use disorder than offspring of non-alcoholics. We really need to change the way that we talk about drugs and alcohol to our kids and give them the real deal scoop. We need to educate them on the detrimental effects drugs and alcohol can have on their bodies, minds, and their brain health. As weed becomes more widely legalized, we have seen an increase in the number of teens using marijuana. We need to educate them that just because something is legal does not mean that it's good for you. I, for one, know that there are kiddos in our neighborhood who started smoking weed at the age of 12. So when I tell this to people, they cannot believe it. And they say, "Are you serious? Like, I don't understand." And I want to tell you, it's the truth. And it's happening all over. So keep an eye out for it. And the next reason teens use is because of multiple life stressors. A study published by Science Direct by Susan L. Anderson and Martin H. Teacher shows that girls were more likely than boys to say that they drink to relieve stress and to forget about their problems. In contrast, boys were more likely than girls to say that they drink because all the popular kids do it. Girls experiencing depressive symptoms were more likely to drink to feel better. And when boys experienced 3 or more stressful events, they were more likely to drink to deal with the stress. The teenage brain is undergoing a massive amount of change during adolescence, and any additional stress from family situations, financial insecurity, or the need to succeed and fit in can contribute to their risk for substance use disorders. So this leads us to the next who of adolescents that use drugs or alcohol habitually. Children who have poor parent-child relationships. Teens who think that their parents don't understand them, don't care to get to know them for who they actually are, or who feel underloved, unwanted by their parents, are at higher risk of using drugs and alcohol in an unhealthy way. It's vital that we create an environment where our teens feel comfortable coming to us with their problems and their questions. We need to start at a very young age talking to our kiddos in a way that's calm so that they can feel comfortable coming to us with problems without the fear of punishment or disappointment or disapproval from us. And we have to continue to nourish that relationship into adolescence. I make it a regular practice to talk to my own teen about drugs, emotions, sex, and alcohol from a scientific and factual standpoint. I give her the facts and try to make it as normal as possible. And thus far, it seems to be working. I'll report back when we actually make it to college. The last who of teens who use are those who are struggling with mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, ADHD, or ADD. Those kiddos, when left untreated, are more likely to use drugs and alcohol to self-medicate. However, when treated, we see a significant decrease in drug and alcohol abuse. Also, I want to point this out, teens, high school students who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, they are twice as likely to have substance use disorders than their heterosexual, cisgendered peers. So that's something else to keep an eye out for. We really need to be protecting our kiddos, keeping an eye out for any mental health issues, any depression, any anxiety, insecurities about their identity, unsureness of who they are. And we need to make sure that we're helping them navigate that so that they don't turn to drugs and alcohol as a means for coping. I wasn't originally planning to have this in here, but I think it's important to note here that last week we talked about the 20 things that I can do instead of drink. And I think it's important that we stop right here and just use that tool for helping our teens cope with life. So if you haven't listened to last week's podcast episode, please go back and do that. And maybe sit down with your teen and create a list of things that they can do instead of drink and use drugs. This might be wonderful for your middle school kids, your 5th graders, your 6th graders, because like I said, I know some kiddos who started smoking weed the summer between 7th and 8th grade. So when I say create this list with your 5th, 6th grader, I know you probably think I sound insane, but I saw firsthand how early this stuff can start. So yeah, I would encourage you to go back, listen to that episode, and sit down with your kiddos and create a list of 20 things that they can do to have fun that don't involve drugs and alcohol. Maybe a list of 20 things that they can do to cope with the stress of life that don't involve drugs and alcohol, so that you're equipping them with these tools that they can use when life hits them hard. And it will, especially when they start getting into high school and the stress factors go through the roof. Okay, so before we move on to part 2, which is what to look out for, I want to stop right here and define substance abuse and dependence. so that we are clear on when teen drug use and drinking have crossed the line into problematic behavior. Don't get me wrong. I truly believe all teens should refrain from using drugs and alcohol to protect the growth and development of their brain. But I want to show that there is a difference between a teen who can try weed once and walk away, or who can have a drink or two at a party and then call it a night. And on the other side, the teen who gets high every day despite consequences, who drinks so much each weekend that they are on the verge of alcohol poisoning on a regular basis, or the teen who has started to dabble in harder drugs like acid and pain pills and fentanyl or whatever the case may be. So the DSM-4, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, defines these as such. So both substance dependence and substance abuse are classified as substance use disorders, or SUDS. Substance abuse is characterized by a pattern of substance use leading to the neglect of roles or commitments, physical hazards, legal issues, or interpersonal problems. Substance dependence is a little more extreme diagnosis, wherein use of the substance is reoccurring to the point of reducing important social and occupational activities, causing tolerance of the substance and or withdrawals, and causing the user to devote a great deal of time to obtain and use the substance. Substance abuse and dependence can lead to other forms of medical disorders, including mood, anxiety, and sleep disorders. So that is the difference between substance abuse and substance dependence. Dependence is really when every minute of the day, majority of the day, is dedicated to finding or using the drug, and there is that physical withdrawal component. The American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy lists the following warning signs to look for in your teens if you are suspecting drug abuse, or if you see these, to kind of make your bells go off and say, okay, maybe my child has a problem. The physical evidence of drugs and drug paraphernalia, behavior problems or poor grades in school, emotional distancing, isolation, depression, or fatigue, change in friendships or extreme influence by peers, hostility, irritability, or change in level of cooperation around the house, lying or increased evasiveness about school or weekend whereabouts, a decrease in interest in personal appearance, physical changes such as bloodshot eyes, runny nose, frequent sore throats, rapid weight loss, changes in mood, eating, or sleep patterns, dizziness, or memory problems. The Merrick manuals offer these signs to look out for too: erratic behavior, depression or mood swings, change in attitude, acting paranoid, irritable, or anxious, having difficulty staying on task or staying focused, stealing and lying, becoming secretive, locking their bedroom door, a change in friends, declining school performance, a loss of interest in hobbies, acting aggressive or angry or irresponsible, sleeping more than usual, missing school, sports, or work. And then some physical signs that the Merrick manuals list are poor hygiene, change in appearance, the same kind of glazed, watery, or bloodshot eyes, dilated pupils or constricted pupils. So the pupils are larger than normal or smaller than normal. Frequent nosebleeds or runny nose, sores in the mouth, on the lips, or both. And I can also say this one can be like increased acne, or picking, When I was doing math, I had a lot of friends. I've always had pretty clear complexion, so I never really struggled with this one, but I had friends that would break out and then they would tweak out and poke their face for hours. And so they would have these massive pimple growths on their faces. Puffy faces, small track marks. So these can look like little needle pinpricks on their arms or legs, or in between the toes or the fingers when they're really trying to hide it. And they might wear long sleeves all the time, even in warmer weather. I do want to point out that this one, the wearing long sleeves, can also be a predictor of self-harm. I do know that it's fashionable to wear a hoodie, even in the dead of summer in Texas. But just something to keep an eye out for if your teen hasn't ever followed the hoodie trend and all of a sudden they are. You might do some poking around and try to figure out what's going on. Shaky hands or cold hands or sweaty palms, headaches, fidgeting, shakes or tremors, or sudden weight loss. I was already skinny in high school, so I lost a little bit of weight, but it wasn't as noticeable on me when I lost weight until like later on when it got really bad and I dropped down to like 99 pounds. But that is something to keep an eye out for. Sometimes it can be hard to differentiate between normal teenage behavior and problematic behavior, but always err on the side of caution. It's better to get your kiddos into therapy and realize they're just dealing with normal teen stress and emotions than to think, this too shall pass, and then realize too little too late that your child has a full-blown substance abuse or substance dependence disorder. So yeah, it's just better to err on the side of caution. So let's talk about what you can do to help your teen that may be struggling with substance abuse or dependence. It can be uber hard to bring yourself to a place where you have to take your child out of school to go into rehab. No one wants to think that their child needs rehab. No one thinks it could be happening to them. But ignoring the issues only leaves it to fester and grow bigger. Maybe therapy would be your first step. This is always a great place to start. Put your child in contact with someone who specializes in adolescents. And be sure to express your concerns to the therapist. Like, tell her or him, I suspect that my child may have a drug problem, so that they can give your child the very best care. It does absolutely no good to go into a therapeutic relationship and withhold concerns from the professional. All parties must be on the same page, and they must all be brutally honest for the professional to provide the very best possible care. There are recovery coaches like myself that can help provide peer support to your team and help them find the power within to process the trauma or contributing factors to their substance abuse. There are groups such as AA and NA, though some of those groups are a much older crowd. And so there are other options such as collegiate recovery groups. I haven't done a whole lot of research into teen drug support groups. I can. If you need me to, you can reach out to me and I can do that for you. But there's also outpatient rehab options that a medical professional can help you get into. I'm going to be linking more information on resources for helping adolescents who are struggling with substance use disorders in the show notes. So make sure that you take a look at those. I also want to suggest, just like I did a little bit earlier, the list of 20 things that your teen can do instead of use or drink. I would encourage you to start to have some open and honest and real conversations with your preteens about substance use and drinking. It's important that we change the narrative of what we've been telling our kids and start teaching them that the choices they make in their teenage years can have lifelong effects on their life. Kiddos who start using drugs and alcohol as teens are much more likely to be lifelong drug addicts or alcoholics. So I thank you for tuning in today. I hope today's episode has taught you something or given you some hope that there is help for your kiddo. I hope that today's episode taught you at least one thing and helped you see that you and your teen were made for more than merely surviving. You were made for thriving. Crumbs are for the birds. You were made for the feast, my friend. Don't forget that. For more information on the 6-week course to cultivating an abundantly fulfilling life by reigniting your passions and zeal for life, please visit the link in the show notes. Or you can text course to 806-317-8181, and that phone number is also in the show notes. This course could be amazing for your teen. It could really show them how to enjoy their teenage years without having to turn to drugs and alcohol for fun or for dealing with stress. If you want to dig in deeper each week and create your own personal roadmap to cultivating an abundantly fulfilling life, then hop on over to our Patreon page and become a Rebel VIP today. As a Rebel VIP, you get a companion episode to each podcast episode each week that digs in deeper and takes this episode to the next level. You'll also have exclusive access to worksheets, printable journal pages, and other useful information that will help you begin to cultivate an abundantly fulfilling life in recovery. Not in recovery? No worries. Just like with every episode that drops, the tools we share in the Rebel VIP can be used to help you cultivate abundance in any aspect of your life. For more information on becoming a Rebel VIP, you can visit the link in the show notes or visit Rebel and reawakencoaching.com and click on Rebel VIP. Last but not least, if this podcast is making an impact on your life, please share it. You can subscribe so that you never miss an episode and take a screenshot of the episode and share it on your social stories and tag me. I would be forever grateful if you could share this with someone who you think might benefit from it. As always, be well, be kind, and may you find some joy this week. Bye.